Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes Sportsbook. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 215 event, which takes place in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing the film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost 2 units for UFC Fight Night 115 after going 0-2 on our premium bets last week. We also won our 1 unit free bet on Leon Edwards. Back to the present, UFC 215 features a 12 fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the card on Fight Pass is a lightweight contest between Cajun Johnson, who is 21-12-1, and Adriano Martins, who is 28-8. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Martins minus 230, the comeback on Johnson at plus 170. Right now, looking over our sponsored sportsbook, 5dimes.eu. It's currently Martins minus 440, the comeback on Johnson at plus 350. So immediate action came in Martins' way. I get it. I didn't expect that much action coming in his way, though, obviously, because I opened it a little bit lower than it should be at this point. But I do respect, all the action, all you guys that came in and took that minus 230. I understand why you went that way. Stylistically, if you look at this matchup against Johnson for Martins, where does he really lose it at? Martins has the better wrestling here. I think Martins obviously has the better chance of the knockout as well, because his chin, even though he's been knocked out a couple times in his career, I don't think his chin's quite as weak as Johnson. And of course, Martins is, I think, the heavier hitter as well. And then when you look at the jiu-jitsu aspect of things as well, Martins has the edge there. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt, and I don't think that Johnson has an advantage over him on the ground. Not that he's a slouch on the ground, but Martins across the board should get all the check marks. But at times, Martins is a little bit too tentative for my liking. That's one thing that I have noticed in the past. His last fight with Santos, I understand Santos is a really good ground fighter. His stand-up's improving, but I was expecting better things from Martins. He needed to really put his foot on the gas and be a little bit more aggressive at times, and he didn't do that, and it basically cost him the fight. So, in my opinion, I wasn't that impressed with that performance. And if Johnson here, stylistically, again, it favors Martins this fight, but Johnson is not a bad fighter. He's pretty well-rounded in all areas as well. His striking is not bad. He can be very effective. Offensively, he's fun to watch, has a little bit of knockout power. He has a bit of wrestling in his game as well, and he has jiu-jitsu to go along with it. So he's a very complete fighter as well. It's just trusting his chin. His chin is definitely suspect. He's been knocked out. He's been rocked and subbed. He's been, tested with that chin many times, and unfortunately for him, that's his biggest kryptonite, in my opinion. Outside of that, though, he's got good takedown defense, and he does push a higher pace than Martins does. So I think this will be a fun fight while it lasts, but I do think what most people are thinking probably within this matchup is Martins eventually finds that chin of Johnson and puts him out. I do understand, and I think that's how it goes as well. But I'm kind of hoping not, especially with all the action that is coming in Martins' way and people putting him in parlays. They basically think this fight's already over. Now, one thing of note is that Johnson has been out since his last win over Kotani, which was in 2015. So he's been out a couple years. Now, during that time, I know he's been working hard. He opened a TriStar gym, I believe, in Vancouver. So it's not like he's, been active or inactive or whatever. He's been training. He's mentally, he's in a good spot right now too, because he's got a lot of good training partners that he's bringing in. And he's starting to become a teacher more so, as well, like a coach. And that's also going to help improve his game, I think. If you're doing some teaching, if you're doing some coaching, it kind of improves your overall game as well. So that's not necessarily going to hurt him, but he has been out of the cage for a couple of years. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of improvements he's made, or if he comes in and looks flat. So there's some question marks to be said about Johnson, that's for sure. And I think as far as this fight goes, it should be, like I said, a fun fight while it lasts, but I do think that Martins probably gets that knockout. If it hits the scorecards, though, this is in Canada as well, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a pretty competitive fight, a close decision. So my pick is Martins, but we'll see how it ends up going.
Honestly, I don't think this fight's going to be very close. Cajun Johnson is a well-rounded fighter that trains out of a good gym, but he has a massive fatal flaw, and it's his chin. He just does not have a good chin. He can't take a good punch, and Adriano Martins hits hard. Now, the big difference between the two is Martins at times is tentative. He's had some really bad fights in the UFC. He's had some insanely impressive performances inside the octagon. So if the super crappy Martins shows up, then Johnson has a chance, but that's relying a little bit too much on that version. Like, Martins sits back and is way too reactive when he faces high-level fighters, like when he took on Habilov, or most recently against Santos, Leonardo Santos. Those were fights where not a lot happened, he didn't land a lot of strikes, and they weren't very entertaining. But when he faces guys that are more mid-level or lower level in the division, he usually just stomps them. He lands some big shots. He takes care of business. So against Cajun Johnson, even though Johnson is a little bit more active, Johnson is well-rounded, Johnson is not better on the ground than Martins, and Johnson is not more powerful than Martins, and Johnson doesn't have the durability of Martins. So unless Martins just sits back and lets Johnson dictate the entire fight for 3 straight rounds and loses a decision, I don't see how Johnson could lose, or how Johnson could win. So Martins probably connects with a big right hand at some point and just puts Johnson out. That's just what happens. There's a big hit me button on Johnson's face that says, I'm going to lose if you touch this, and Martins is probably going to do that. So plain and simple, I think Martins wins, probably by knockout. Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Luis Henrique, who is 10-3 with 1 no contest, taking on UFC newcomer Arjun Singh Bhullar, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Bhullar minus 190 to come back on Henrique at plus 150. Right now, looking over 5 times, it is Bhullar minus 185 to come back on Henrique at plus 160. So line margins have tightened up, but not a lot of action coming in this way. I think there's a lot of question marks out there about Bhullar, really, more than anything else. I'll tell you what, the guy's definitely a talented prospect. I mean, he's 31 years old, so as far as age goes, it's definitely a concern a little bit because he's not the youngest guy making his UFC debut. But I think he's just a pure athlete, so I don't think age is going to be much factor. Not that 31 years old is old, but you'd like to see these prospects come in and in their mid-20s or so. So that being said, Bhullar's background, he's an Olympic freestyle wrestler from Canada. He's trained at AKA with Cormier and crew at times as well. And I think he's really put himself in a good position here to have some early on success in the UFC at only 6-0. If you look at his amateur or his fight record before he enters the UFC, rather, I mean, it's not bad. I mean, you want to see some better names on his resume, but at the same time, I think he's been brought along pretty well. And again, he's just one of these type of fighters that is just a special athlete. So he really picks up on things really well. I think he just absorbs everything. He's got good training partners, good mentality. He just has that winning attitude, which you like to see. Now, as far as skill goes, I mean, there's not a whole lot of footage out there on him for sure. So you guys got to be careful if you are going to bet this fight because there's a lot of unknown factors here. But that being said, from what we have seen, I know Bhullar's boxing seems to be okay. It's developing. I think it's going to look better fight by fight. He does have a little bit of knockout power. Of course, his bread and butter is definitely the wrestling aspect of things. So he can get the fight down in most cases when he wants to, and he can control the fight on the ground as well. So I think that is where he's going to have an edge over a lot of heavyweights in the UFC, obviously. But Henrique here, he's not going to be an easy fight to make for your UFC debut. Henrique has a lot of skill as well. I think he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. On the feet, it's going to be interesting because I don't think Henrique is all that bad. Offensively, he's pretty good. He's got a little bit of pop in his punches as well. Defensively, he has been caught. He's been knocked out a little bit. He does start to slow down as the fight progresses a little bit as well. So that's one thing to keep an eye on here with Henrique. But outside of that, I mean, his wrestling's not even that bad in his own right. I mean, he's capable of getting some takedowns. And he's capable of submitting people on the ground as well. So Henrique is a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's no slouch at all, like I mentioned. He has been knocked out now 3 times. I mean, all of his losses have been in that form. So that is something to keep an eye out here. But again, Bhullar's one of these guys that's kind of developing his skill set overall. So will he get the knockout over Henrique? Maybe as the fight progresses a little bit, I can see it happening. If it hits the scorecards, I can see Bhullar winning as well. So I do think you give the slight edge across the board to Bhullar. I think he's just going to, again, be the one pushing a higher pace. He's going to have a little bit more gas in the tank. Even though the UFC jitters might come into play early on, I think he settles into this fight and ends up looking a little bit better than Henrique as the fight progresses. So I think Bular probably gets this done. I mean, possibly inside as it goes, or even either on the scorecards he edges it out. So that's my pick right here, but I hope it's just a competitive, fun fight. So we really get to see Bular test it out, because he is a serious prospect, and a lot of people have said a lot of good things about him. So we'll see how much of a run he can make towards the UFC gold here in a minute.
This is a bit of a confusing fight for me, because Luis Henrique is not a bum in the heavyweight division, and with Bular being a great prospect out of Canada and India with his Indian heritage, you would think that they would want him to get an easy win and a very impressive debut, but I think Henrique is probably going to put up a pretty good fight. I mean, this guy has had some tough bouts against some really good UFC heavyweights. I mean, Henrique gave Francis Ngannou a really tough scrap in his UFC debut, in both of their debuts, I believe. And then he also had a pretty tough fight against Tibura, getting some takedowns early before fading and getting TKO'd in his most at the end. So, and the guy's 2-2 so far in the octagon. So I'm a little surprised that they're matching Bular, a very talented up and coming heavyweight, against somebody that's got some experience and has had some success in the octagon. So I guess maybe that's just how high they think of Bular, that he can treat this like a tune-up fight. Because, I mean, Bular's coming in with a wave of hype. I mean, I've heard he's going to be bringing in Bollywood stars, WWE champion Jinder Mahal's going to be walking him to the octagon for his entrance. I mean, this is a serious deal for Bular. I mean, they really want this guy to potentially be one of the next big things in the heavyweight division. I mean, he's a former freestyle Olympic gold medalist, so lot of hype behind this guy, and with reason. I mean, he has excellent wrestling credentials, and you don't see a lot of those guys make it to the UFC or come over to the UFC that were wrestling at the heavier weight classes. I mean, you look at the champion level, Olympic level, elite fighters in the UFC, and it's, Yoel Romero, who fought for the title, Daniel Cormier, the champ, who can't be John Jones, but is one of the best light heavyweights in the world. So, big freestyle, heavyweight Olympians are a rare commodity, and Bular is a very talented, very athletic fighter. Now, he's not the biggest heavyweight. I mean, he's going to come in about 240 pounds. He's a little shorter for the heavyweights, but kind of has a similar build to Daniel Cormier, to be honest. And he gets takedowns, he gets ground and pound, he beats people up, and he trains actually with Daniel Cormier right now. He didn't originally, but he's been getting some work in at American Kickboxing Academy, and they have a lot of really talented heavyweights over there. Not just Cormier and Cain Velasquez, but guys like, Justin Willis and others. So he's getting some good training over there, and I expect that Bular is going to be well prepared for this fight. So, I mean, I'm going to side with Bular, but he can't sleep on Henrique. I mean, Henrique is going to be able to hold his own with Bular on the feet, probably. And Henrique does have a underrated submission game that has helped him get some wins. So, if Bular's sloppy out there, then he could leave an opening for Henrique to tap him out or to do something. I don't think Henrique can win a decision. I think Bular, just with that wrestling base, he's going to be well conditioned, well prepared, and he's going to have a big time crowd support. So I'm siding with Bular, but this is not a cakewalk. So officially, though, my pick is going to be Bular. Now, moving on and dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Mitch Clark, who is 11-4, taking on Alex White, who is 11-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in White -170, the comeback on Clark at +130. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it's White -190. The comeback on Clark is at +165. So 2 action has come in on this fight. Line margins have tightened up, but a little bit more as we get closer to fight time coming in White's way. Really wasn't sure how the betting action would come in on this fight. I know that typically speaking, both these guys don't get a ton of respect at the betting window. So it is intriguing. I mean, Clark's been an underdog, I think, almost every fight. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, but I think he has been entering these fights as an underdog. And Clark's not a bad fighter. I mean, he does have a pretty well-rounded skill set, but where he excels at the most is definitely on the ground. I'm glad to see him working with Greg Jackson and crew in New Mexico. I think that was a good move for his career, especially at this stage of his career. I think it will help his overall game. And, he's been putting in some time and hard work over there. So I'm expecting him to look probably better than he's looked in a while. That being said, White's probably a tough matchup. So I do agree with some of the more action that's coming in White's way here, because Clark's wrestling isn't really the greatest. It's okay, and it can be effective against some fighters, but I don't think it's going to be effective enough against White. And that's said with the fact that White does have problems at times in the octagon so far by being put on his back by better wrestlers. I mean, if you look at the Tony Martin fight in his last fight, I mean, that's how Martin was able to kind of grind out the win against White. But White did show signs of decent takedown defense, but he didn't get the job done quite well enough, and he got put on his back. I think Clark is going to struggle doing exactly what Martin did in his last fight. So this is a little bit harder for Clark than it is White, because White does have some nasty underrated power on the feet. I mean, he pushes forward. He has good accuracy with the striking at times as well. So I think he's going to probably find that chin of Clark's, and that's one aspect of Clark's game that is weak. I mean, even in his last fight, he ended up getting submitted by Duffy, but it was a big right hand that dropped him first. So, I mean, that's where Clark has to be careful here. He's going to want to try to get this fight to the ground, and if he's not able to, I think White's going to probably pick him apart enough on the feet and do damage enough that he probably gets him out of there as well. So this is definitely not the easiest fight to pick, because both these guys, have their weaknesses. Both of these guys have pretty decent ability in some areas, and both of these guys have kind of a well-rounded skill set as well. But I do think that stylistically, this fight kind of favors White, and I think he's able to sprawl brawl, keep this fight upright, like I said, and probably land enough on the feet to win him on the cards, or possibly get a knockout over Clark as well. So my pick is Alex White, and it's a pick that I'm fairly confident about, honestly.
Yeah, the main issue here is just how one-dimensional Mitch Clark is. Now, I know he's fighting in Canada, so he does have that going for him, but the problem is if he doesn't get fights to the ground and he doesn't get his opponent in a compromising position, he's probably going to lose. White has never been submitted. White has relatively decent takedown defense. It's not amazing, but Tony Martin had some issues taking him down and keeping him down, and that's the most important part, is keeping him down. If Clark can get him down, can he keep him from getting back to his feet? And I don't know if he can. White is strong. Even though he's moving up from the featherweight division, or at least he did in his last fight, then even though he is moving up or has moved up, he's still pretty big for a lightweight. He's going to have a big time striking advantage, even though he's not the greatest striker in the world, but he's going to outpace Clark. He has a better chin. He's more durable. He's tougher, and he's has that ability to get out of submissions. Like, Tony Martin is a big, strong lightweight, and he couldn't keep White down, and he couldn't really go for any of his patented submissions, and he's very good at arm blocks and kimuras and you name it on the ground. Just types of submissions where he can just overpower people, and White wasn't able to be overpowered. So I don't know how Clark is going to get this done unless he gets a takedown early and latches onto something, or maybe the only way I really see Clark winning is if he puts White in a position on the ground where White feels confident, like maybe Clark's on his back, maybe pulls guard, and then he, tricks it with something like he did against Al Iaquinta, where Iaquinta thought he had him, and then Clark choked him out from his back with a darce or something. I forget exactly how he did it, but it was a really sneaky submission. So maybe that's how he could do it, by kind of tricking White. But other than that, I don't think he has much of a chance. So I'm siding with White. I think he either wins by stoppage after hurting Clark on the feet, or he at least wins a decision if he plays it safe. So my pick's going to be Alex White. Now dropping down to the featherweight division and kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Gavin Tucker, who is 10-0 taking on Rick Glenn, who is 19-4-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Tucker minus 190, the comeback on Glenn at plus 150. Right now it's Tucker minus 260. The comeback on Glenn is at plus 220. So a little bit more action coming in Tucker's way. There was some early action coming in Glenn's way as well. So there is two-way action on this fight. We're just gradually raising the price on Tucker a bit as a little bit more action comes in his way. And again, parlay material as well. 5 Dimes is basically the king of, taking fight parlays, as most of you guys know out there. I mean, they get a ton of action as far as parlays go compared to a lot of other sports books. So that being said, this is a pretty good fight. I mean, Tucker's getting a test. He, in his debut against Sam Cecilia, he got tested as well. I mean, Sam's no easy out, and Tucker looks phenomenal. I mean, especially those first 2 rounds. He struggled a little bit in the third. I don't want to say, maybe I shouldn't use struggled, but the third round didn't go as smooth as the first couple did for Tucker. But man, I mean, you could definitely see the skill set being on display there. I mean, there was a lot of hype coming in, before Tucker's official UFC debut. And he lived up to it. I mean, I was really impressed by his debut. He put on a clinic, really, as far as striking goes. The guy's fast. He's got some power. He's got some good footwork and movement. He's got some good fight IQ. He's got really good conditioning to go along with it. So it seems like his gas tank is pretty much endless. And I think he's going to come into shape here, and he's going to be very game in this fight as well. So, I mean, if you look at his wrestling, it's on point as well. But he likes to sprawl, brawl, keep the fight upright. So this guy has a ton of potential. And I think, again, matched up with Glenn here, it's another winnable fight for him. Glenn, I mean, he's been a warrior. He's been one of these guys that's competing in MMA for a long time. And he finally recently made it over, to the UFC, which I'm glad to see, because when you see these guys that are veterans, like a guy like Rick Glenn, I mean, you expect him to be in the UFC a little bit sooner or get a shot a little bit sooner. And he's been working so long, and, it was tough for him to finally get his shot. But once in it, he performed relatively well against Dunham. He lost by decision, and we all expected him to lose by decision in that fight, really, more so than not. But his last fight over Nover, I mean, that proved a lot, because I don't think Nover gets the respect he deserves at times. He's not an easy out, and Glenn was able to kind of grind out a close, gritty decision win over Nover. So he's not an easy out here for Tucker either. I mean, he's going to bring it. Glenn has some length. He's got some ability. He trains, of course, out of Rufus Sport as well. So he's got good trainers, good camp behind him, and he's really improving his overall game. I mean, if you look at him a few fights back in his pro career before he made it over to the UFC, I think his takedown defense since then has gotten a lot better. His offensive wrestling has gotten a lot better as well. And he's going to look to push a pace. I mean, he's going to look to tie Tucker up, even though he's got some length and he's got the reach advantage. I think he's still going to want to kind of grind on Tucker a little bit, up against the cage, kind of slow the fight down a little bit and kind of methodically pick Tucker apart. But it's not going to be easy for him to do that. So this, again, is going to be an interesting fight and a tough test for both guys. I just think Tucker's going to be a little bit too fast on the feet. I think he's going to be able to score frequently on Glenn. I think his takedown defense is going to be good enough to keep Glenn at bay as well. So if that happens, I think we're going to see Tucker win another impressive decision. I don't think he finishes Glenn, because Glenn's so tough. I mean, it's very hard to stop Glenn. So I think Tucker basically wins maybe 2 out of 3 rounds, or maybe possibly all 3 rounds on the scorecards, and has another quality win on his resume. So I expect some big things ahead for Tucker in the featherweight division, and this is going to be another notch on his resume here. So Glenn is game. He's going to bring it, but I'm expecting Tucker to get the W here.
Tucker is a very talented fighter, but he still is a bit untested. He didn't face the best of competition prior to his UFC debut, and then in his UFC debut he took on Sam Cecilia, a guy that's a veteran, but was a pretty ho-hum lower tier featherweight. So we're going to learn a lot about Tucker in this fight, because Rick Glenn is talented. He's well-rounded. He's long for the division. He has a good jab. He has good striking. He's pretty solid with his submission ability. He's going to give Tucker all he can handle. Tucker, watching him fight, he is much more fluid. He mixes things up a little bit better. He throws a lot more kicks than Glenn, and he's going to need to throw those because Glenn has a good jab and he's long. So if his fight is more of a boxing match, then Tucker's going to have a lot of trouble getting inside, because Glenn does keep you at bay with the jab. He does a good job of utilizing his hands. So, I think the leg kicks are going to be extremely important for Tucker. Not just leg kicks, but body kicks, head kicks. Just mix it up. Keep Rick Glenn guessing. The fact that Tucker is so dynamic on the feet is a big advantage for him, because he can keep Glenn off balance a little bit, and Glenn is a little bit more predictable. Glenn does also occasionally, push fights into the fence and try to grind them out a little bit. And that's something Tucker will probably want to avoid. Tucker relies a lot on movement, speed, and then explosiveness to get in and land those good strikes. So if he wants to do that against Glenn, he's going to have to get some angles to get inside and land those shots. So, the kicks are going to be a big help for that. If they can slow Glenn down a little bit, maybe take some wind out of him with some body kicks. The kicks are just extremely important. Tucker does mix in takedowns as well. He's a good, well-rounded fighter, but he does need to be cautious. I mean, if he shoots in for a takedown against Glenn and leaves his neck out there, he might get choked out. I mean, it's possible. So, I do think Glenn trains with better people and he does come from a better environment, but I think Tucker overall is just the better, more dynamic striker, and I expect Tucker to get the victory here, but it would not shock me if Tucker has a lot of trouble with that jab and it takes him a while to figure Glenn out. So I'm picking Tucker, but I'm not crazy confident about it because Rick Glenn is tough and Rick Glenn is a lot better than people are giving him credit for. So my pick is Tucker, though. Now, dropping down to the women's bantamweight division, we have Sarah Morris, who is 4-3, taking on Ashley Evans-Smith, who is 5-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Evans-Smith, minus 245, the comeback on Morris at plus 175. Right now, looking over 5 dimes, it is Evans-Smith minus 250, Morris is plus 210. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, and there is two-way action coming in this fight. I'm sure we'll see a little bit more so coming in on Evans-Smith. She's definitely the more popular fighter, I think, especially at the betting window as well. So I'm surprised this line hasn't even creeped up that much more. To me, this is a very strange fight. I don't know. I mean, common sense says Evans-Smith, in my opinion, should be the girl that puts a little bit more pressure. She's a little bit more aggressive. She should be the stronger of the two, and she should basically be able to grind Morris out in this spot here. She has a little bit more pure power and could be a little bit more dangerous. I think effective ground and pound as well. Evans-Smith has a little bit of weakness on, and on her feet, she's getting better, you could tell, but she still has a little bit of ways to go. She's not going to have that much of a threat though when it comes to Morris. Morris, that's one area that she really needs to improve on. She's getting better a little bit as well, but she needs to improve. I think the gap is even more weak, I guess I should say, for Morris than it is for Evans-Smith. Evans-Smith is just a little bit ahead in the stand-up game. But on the ground, I think pure jiu-jitsu-wise, obviously that's where Morris has her edge. I mean, I think she is pretty slick on the ground with her submission game, and if she gets top position, she can do some damage as well. It's just she needs to be a little bit more aggressive. And now also for Morris, we were talking about fighters having some time off. She's been out since her loss to Andrade, and that was in July 2015. So she's been on the shelf for a little while as well. So this is an intriguing fight. I think it's one that, again, Evans-Smith, it's weird because I think Evans-Smith can push the pace and will probably do so. It's if she makes a mistake along the way. Morris is a hard girl to finish. She's going to show up to fight. She's tough as nails. She's going to be looking for submission throughout the entire fight. She's going to look for that finish. So if Evans-Smith makes a mistake, and she has in the past, she could definitely lose this fight and get caught. I just don't think it's really going to happen here. I just think, again, it might not be the greatest fight. I think it's going to be a bit boring, to be honest with you, but I think Evans-Smith is probably going to do enough to edge Morris out on the scorecards. I think that's how it plays out. So my pick is Evans-Smith to win.
I think this fight's pretty straightforward. Ashley Evans-Smith is bigger, she's stronger, she's a much, much better striker than Sarah Morris. Morris wins her fights because she can get takedowns, she gets top position, and then maybe she can work for submissions and ground and pound. And she's very tough. I mean, you saw that in her last UFC fight, which was quite a while ago now, when she just got the tar kicked out of her by Jessica Andrade. So in that fight, I mean, she showed that she's willing to keep pushing forward even when she's losing and she doesn't have a lot of quit in her, but that's probably her best quality, and that's not the greatest thing to have as your best quality. So unless Evans-Smith just completely gasses trying to finish her and can't do it, or Evans-Smith makes a mental mistake, then I think she should win relatively easily. I mean, the one concern is Evans-Smith, can get submitted. I mean, you saw that she was looking great against Raquel Pennington, who's a top 10 fighter right now in the women's bantamweight division. And then Evans-Smith just kind of left her neck out and got choked unconscious. So she can make those kind of mistakes. So Morris could capitalize on that because she does have some submission ability. But overall, I just think this is a relatively easy fight for Evan Smith. She should dominate Morris on the feet. And if it goes to the ground, Evan Smith should be able to get top position, but she should just be able to avoid the ground regardless. So my pick is going to be Ashley Evan Smith. Now, dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Henry Cejudo, who is 10-2, taking on Wilson Hayes, who is 22-7. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Evan Cejudo minus 475, the comeback on Hayes at plus 325. Right now, looking over at the 5 Dimes screen at Don Best, it is currently minus 330. Cejudo, the comeback on Hayes at plus 270. So, dog action coming in. I bet a lot of people are probably surprised I'm not giving Hayes that much respect or counting him a little bit too far out against Cejudo. I understand it. Hayes deserves to get some respect, but at the same time, stylistically, I think this is another nightmare matchup for him. I mean, let's face it. Hayes is 32 years old. I mean, Cejudo's only 30, but I mean, he's 30 as well. So the age difference isn't huge, but as far as fight years goes, I mean, Hayes has definitely hit that spot where he's had a lot of fights. He made it to the pinnacle, got a title shot in the UFC flyweight division. Unfortunately for him, it didn't go so well, and he suffered a loss. I think here now he's being used obviously as a gatekeeper. And Cejudo, based on his last performance, it's been a while, but based on his last performance against a guy like Benavidez, I mean, I think you can really genuinely see the improvement that he's made in his game. And I think that he's trying to get himself right back in the title mix and prove to everybody with a highlight reel type of performance, which he might get here against Hayes, that he's ready for that title shot and he'll do better against Demetrius Johnson than he did in his last fight. So he has a little bit of redemption, I think, on his mind, and it's driven him to be, I mean, that much better, I think, as far as the cage goes. Because again, what a big improvement we saw in his overall game against Benavidez. And I think, that mentality really goes a long way. And I can understand why Cejudo is a world champion. He's a world-class athlete, everything. I mean, his work ethic drives him so much that's why he accomplishes all that he has. And, you know, as far as his athleticism in his career goes. So Cejudo's a special talent. Not that Hayes is not, but I think that, you know, everything's starting to click for him a little bit. He's getting a little more confidence, a little bit more experience. So, the only way I see really Hayes winning this fight is if he stalls this fight, gets Cejudo's back, and just kind of makes it an ugly, slow-paced, boring fight. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Cejudo's going to be able to keep Hayes at bay and then, again, just kind of drop some bombs and probably even test that chin and maybe get him out of there along the way. If Hayes does make it to the scorecards, I think it's going to be a pretty clear-cut decision for Cejudo as well. So my pick is Cejudo. I don't agree with the dog action coming in on this fight early on, and I think we'll probably see the line climb back up as we get closer to fight time. But Cejudo's the pick for me.
This is just a bad stylistic matchup for Wilson Hayes. Henry Cejudo is the better wrestler. He is the better striker. He has more power, and he has a better chin. The only thing Hayes really has going for him is the fact that he has a strong submission game, but a good, strong submission game isn't going to help him here because you haven't really seen Henry Cejudo in any submission trouble, and Cejudo has faced better submission fighter than Hayes even in Formiga. So, and Cejudo had zero problems with that fight. So, I expect Cejudo to outwork Hayes on the feet because he's the more active striker on top of being a better striker. I expect Cejudo to get takedowns if he wants them. He probably doesn't. And I expect Cejudo to showcase some of that improved power like he had in the Benavidez fight where he almost knocked Benavidez out cold. So, and Wilson Hayes has a much worse chin than Joseph Benavidez. So if Cejudo lands the type of shot that he landed against Benavidez, then this fight's going to be over quickly. Really, realistically, the only way Wilson Hayes wins is if he can get takedowns, put Cejudo on his back, or maybe take Cejudo's back and get a submission. But I just don't see that happening. Cejudo's got too strong of a grappling base. So I think this is, even though Wilson Hayes is one of the best flyweights on the planet, like legitimately probably a top 5 flyweight, I think Henry Cejudo just steamrolls him here and probably gets his first knockout in the UFC. So my pick is going to be Henry Cejudo. Now, moving on to the women's bantamweight division, we have Sarah McMahon, who is 11-3, taking on Ketlin Vieira, who is 8-0. Now, Nick, Where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened McMahon minus 265, the comeback on Vieira at plus 185. Right now, looking over 5 times, it's McMahon actually minus 270, the comeback on Vieira is plus 230. So line margins have tightened up again. Not much action coming in. I mean, there is some two-way with a little bit more parlay action being placed on McMahon as well. I'm not really that surprised. And this is probably a good spot to have the line because you have two of the better athletes and better competitors at 135 pounds going at it. I mean, McMahon's been around the sport for a long time. I mean, it's unfortunate that she's had kind of a rocky road inside the UFC octagon because it's been one of those circumstances that a lot of people thought that she would be the one to really test Ronda Rousey out and possibly, be the one to dethrone her. Obviously that didn't work out as planned, and McMahon's had, again, an up and down roller coaster kind of ride of her career, but she's steadied things out a little bit and she's getting a little bit more confidence. She's had some impressive performances, but the UFC's throwing her one person here that can definitely derail her momentum. I mean, Vieira's a talented fighter in her own right. I mean, she's coming off of an impressive win over Evan Smith. Vieira's just a grinder. I mean, she knows what it takes to push forward, to put a little bit of pressure. Her striking's getting a little bit better. It's nothing that you want to brag about, but at the same time, it can be effective. She's got a little bit of strength. And again, just that grinding style tests a lot of women, and they can't really, put up with that kind of pace or pressure. And that's how she's getting the job done. But against McMahon, stylistically, it's a tough one because McMahon likes to do a lot of the same things. And we all know that McMahon's wrestling credentials are phenomenal, especially in the women's bantamweight division. I mean, what she brings to the table there, she doesn't really get out wrestled much. So McMahon is going to probably have the edge in several categories across the board here. I think McMahon's boxing's actually looking pretty good. She's fast. She's getting a little bit more confident. She's got some pop behind her punches. I mean, she could definitely do some damage. If you watch how she strikes. And then on top of it, I mean, she does get you on the ground. Her ground and pound's decent. She's a little bit inactive at times. I mean, if you look back through some of her fights, I mean, she could be disappointing in times. She needs to be a little bit more active, a little bit more aggressive. But now she's starting to, finish fights as well. So McMahon hasn't looked too bad recently. And I think that confidence and her momentum is going to probably continue to roll here because, again, I think in this spot here, even though Vieira is going to test her and it's not going to be an easy fight, I think McMahon probably edges her out across the board. So that's why I think it's a pretty fair line where it's at right now. If Vieira does pull off the upset win, man, I'll be impressed. I mean, because McMahon is no slouch at all, and I think she's one of the better fighters in a bantamweight division. So interesting fight again, but I lean a little bit more towards McMahon. I think she's just, again, a clear-cut, a little bit better right now in her career across the board than Vieira is. So I think she does enough here to probably win a competitive but clear enough decision here.
This kind of reminds me of the last fight we talked about, Cejudo Hayes. Basically, Sarah McMahon is just a better version of Ketlen Vieira. Vieira is good on the ground. McMahon's better on the ground with her wrestling. Vieira relies a lot on takedowns. McMahon's an Olympic medalist in wrestling with her takedowns. And when she gets in top position, she can just be downright devastating. We saw McMahon is kind of taken it to the next level more recently with her fight against Alexis Davis. I thought Davis's submission game would be a big threat to McMahon because she's had some issues against really good submission fighters in the past, and Sarah McMahon just tore through Alexis Davis like she was nothing. It was incredible. And then she didn't just beat her, she submitted her. And then in her last fight, Sarah McMahon faced an opponent that, took the fight on short notice and was overmatched. And you know what Sarah McMahon did? She beat her like you're supposed to do against somebody that's overmatched. She took her down, beat the tar out of her, and tapped her out quickly. That's what you're supposed to do when you're a heavy favorite. And she did, and she looked great doing it. So Sarah McMahon is fighting at a very high level right now. Now, Ketlen Vieira is talented. She clearly has a good ground game, good takedowns, good submission ability, but I just think the only way she can beat McMahon is by finishing her, and I don't think she can. Sarah McMahon is too strong. She's too good with her wrestling. And really the only people that have been able to beat McMahon have been able to hurt her on the feet for the most part, like Ronda Rousey did with those knees to the liver, or Amanda Nunes did with, just that brutal striking that she has, that ability she has. So Sarah McMahon should be able to just get takedowns, get top position, and then just start dropping bombs on Ketlen Vieira. I don't know if she'll get a finish, but I can just see McMahon going a little bit more back to her roots where she was grinding out fights with her wrestling rather than trying to get finishes, because I think Vieira's going to put up quite a fight. So my pick's going to be Sarah McMahon. I just don't think Vieira has enough weapons to stop her. Now, kicking off the pay-per-view main card is a featherweight contest between Jeremy Stephens, who is 25-13, and Gilbert Melendez, who is 22-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Talk about a weird fight, just stylistically. I mean, Melendez dropping to 145 pounds alone is a kind of a head scratcher, especially all those years watching him be one of the top lightweights in the world. But getting right into the odds, I opened Stephens minus 135, the comeback on Melendez at minus 105. So virtually pick him with a slight lean towards Stephens. Right now it's minus 110 either way at 5 dimes. So minus 110 Stephens, minus 110 Melendez is exactly a pick'em type of fight. And there has been two-way action coming into this fight as well. Early on, I saw some action coming in towards Melendez that they reported. Now, then after that, I should say, we saw some action back on Stephens, and now we're seeing back towards Melendez a little bit as well. So it'll keep on flopping back and forth. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Melendez being a slight favorite at one point, then by fight time, maybe Stephens is a slight favorite as well. This is that type of fight. It's just tough to pick because both these guys are so good. They've been around the sport for a long time. They got great experience. I mean, what can you say? Melendez, in my opinion, at one point was the best lightweight in the world, even though he wasn't on the UFC roster at that time. I mean, the talent level this guy has everywhere. I mean, everywhere the fight takes place, he doesn't probably get the recognition he deserves with his striking game. I mean, he has great boxing. If you look back, his fight in Strikeforce against Masvidal, for example, I mean, he outboxed a guy like Masvidal. It was competitive, but I mean, he had his way with him. So Melendez is the type of fighter that anywhere the fight took place, I mean, he could push a high pace. His cardio was terrific. He can wrestle you. He can put you down on his back, or on your back, I should say. He could take your back. He could submit you. I mean, just a complete fighter. And again, at one point, I believe he was really the best lightweight in the world. Unfortunately for him, Father Time cut up to him a little bit. He's 35 years old. He made his UFC debut, and he's been okay. I mean, he made it to a title shot. I mean, what else can you say there? A lot of people have been wanting to see Melendez on the roster for a long time, and he came in, and they gave him a shot against Anthony Pettis, which, unfortunately, again, that fight didn't really play out as planned for him. But that being said, it wasn't, a horrible setback for him. I mean, he can rebound nicely. It just, he hasn't looked the same. He wasn't the vintage type of Melendez that we were used to seeing before he came into the UFC, or, some of those throwback fights for Melendez. So I think it's been a little bit disappointing. And in fact, the biggest fight to me that points that out is his fight against Eddie Alvarez. That was a close competitive fight. He looked great in that first round. I mean, did some damage to Eddie Alvarez, but as the fight progressed, he got tired. He let Alvarez back into that fight, and it just wasn't a Melendez-like performance. So to me, Melendez has hit that decline spot. He's not the same fighter he was, and that's what makes this fight even more intriguing, because Stephens is no joke. I mean, Stephens definitely has a lot of power. He's been fighting at 145 pounds, obviously a little bit longer than Melendez. He's had some success there. He's not easy to take down. And again, with those heavy hands, Melendez is tough as nails. I mean, nobody's stopped him. Nobody's, I should say, knocked him out in his career. I mean, Pettis was able to get the sub victory over him, but Melendez is tough to finish. And I think Stephens is going to have a difficult time doing so. But with the weight drop, with the time off, I mean, Melendez has been off for a while as well. I'm not sure what to expect from Melendez, so it's hard for me to pick him. I think that what we've seen recently from Stephens, I mean, it hasn't been really the best performances either from Stephens. I mean, he's faced some really tough competition. I know in his last fight, a lot of people were surprised that he lost to Moicano. But, I mean, he's really a solid fighter. I know he's coming off a loss as well. But that being said, it's just Stephens, who he's lost against, who he's competed against, I don't think he's showing much sign of a decline. I just think it's been tough competition that he hasn't been able to beat. And Melendez here, he's going to be tough competition as well. But with those question marks surrounding Melendez, I kind of lean a little bit more towards Stephens. So this is definitely a head scratcher, but I guess in my opinion, it's not a confident pick. But I'm going to pick Stephens to win. I think he could probably outstrike Melendez and get a 3-round decision, a competitive type of decision, but I think he could do that. So my pick is Stephens and probably on the scorecards.
It's crazy to think what's happened here with Gilbert Melendez. I mean, he hasn't fought in a year because of a steroid suspension. He is on a 3-fight losing streak. And now he's dropping down to the featherweight division for the first time at 35 years old. That's crazy. I mean, it's nuts. There's so many variables with Melendez here that it's just almost impossible to predict how this fight is going to play out. Now, Jeremy Stephens is in a similar boat, not on a huge losing streak, but he has lost a couple in a row. But he also dropped down from the lightweight division a little bit later in his career, but at least he's still, 31. And Stephens has had success against pretty much all the mid and even some upper level featherweights. So even though Gilbert Melendez is the more technical striker and probably has a better wrestling background, I just don't know how much I can trust the guy at this point. How is he going to look off the steroids? How is he going to look at featherweight for the first time? How is he going to look after having not fought in a year? How is he going to look with insane amount of pressure on him to perform, knowing that he probably is getting released if he loses, coming off of a 3-fight losing streak? I mean, there's just so much to think about with this fight. With how they match up, Melendez is definitely the better striker, but can he also keep up the pace? I mean, he's been gassing in his last couple fights. He gassed against Eddie Alvarez after a strong start. He gassed against Anthony Pettis in his title shot. And then against Barbosa, he just got the crap kicked out of him for 3 straight rounds. So I don't know what to expect with Melendez. Yeah, he was one of the best fighters in the world, but that was 2011. That was more than half a decade ago. He's just not the same fighter anymore. Now, I'm not saying it's not capable that he can kind of harken back to that a little bit, because he's shown flashes. I mean, he looked awesome in the first round against Eddie Alvarez. He was beating the crap out of Alvarez. He looked good in the first round against Pettis, but he just couldn't keep it up. Now, again, those guys were all top 10 lightweights, and Stephens is a fringe top 10, top 15 featherweight. So this is an easier fight for him, but it's still not a cakewalk. Stephens is tough as nails, and he has big power, and he doesn't have conditioning issues is another thing. I mean, this guy has at least 3 or 4 devastating third round knockouts to his name. So if Melendez starts to slow down, even if he does win the first round, which I definitely think he's capable of, is at least winning the first round, Stephens could just come on strong later and put him away. So I think Melendez looks okay, and I wouldn't be shocked if he wins this fight, because if they were both lightweights and they were fighting 6 years ago at Melendez's peak, I thought I would pick Melendez in a heartbeat. I mean, he would win. He'd be a minus 1,000 favorite at least. But it's not 6 years ago. It's today, and he's on a terrible streak. He's coming off of a steroid suspension, and he's dropping to featherweight for the first time. And I just don't know what to expect from the guy, so I'm going to stick with what I know. And I think Jeremy Stephens has the ability to potentially knock Melendez out. I mean, Melendez was almost knocked out by Diego Sanchez in the third round of his fight against him. So, I mean, if that could happen, then Stephens could definitely put Melendez away. So I'm going to pick Stephens, but again, if Melendez fights at what he's capable of, he should be able to win, but I just can't trust him right now. So my pick is going to be Jeremy Stephens. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Ilir Latifi, who is 13-5 with 1 no contest, taking on Tyson Pedro, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Another tough matchup here. I opened Latifi minus 140 to come back on Pedro at even money. Right now looking over at 5 dimes. It's actually with Latifi minus 125, the comeback on Pedro at plus 105. So line margins have tightened up, and there is 2 action coming in this fight as well. And it is an intriguing fight. I mean, it's tough. Another one, because you see Latifi's experience level and the people that he's faced so far in his UFC career. I mean, you can't even compare that to Pedro's resume at all. So Pedro, to me, is still untested, even though he's looked good so far. I mean, in his short career in the UFC, he's had a couple fights, but both of those fights have ended in the first round and by stoppage. I mean, that's how dangerous Pedro can be. But outside of that, if you look at some of the competition he's faced, it's basically some watered down competition in Australia. So it is what it is. You could tell even in the Roundtree fight early on, he needs to work on the stand-up. He needs to work on some areas of his game still. But, I mean, the size of this guy, of Pedro, the athleticism, the talent, the potential that he has, I see it. And, I mean, he's already cracked the top 15 in the light heavyweight division. I mean, that just tells you how weak the light heavyweight division is, though, as far as UFC roster goes. It's definitely one of the worst divisions from top to bottom on the whole roster of the UFC. But that's not taking anything away from the top 15 here. There's definitely some talent in this division. And obviously we would like to see even more get in, and I'm sure we will see some improvements made in the next year or so with this division. But with all that being said, Pedro is definitely a guy to keep an eye on. And if he does pull off this upset win over Latifi, then he's going to kind of prove to me and prove to everybody else that, look, he can beat some quality opponents, because that's exactly what Latifi is. If you look at his resume, I mean, it's been a little bit up and down for Latifi as well, but I mean, typically speaking, he's pretty consistent. You know what he's going to bring to the table. The guy comes to fight. He's got some pretty good hands, some good boxing. He's got some good wrestling. He's got some good takedown defense as well. You know that he's able to make it out of the first round and still have enough gas in the tank to finish 3 strong. We're not so sure about that with Pedro. So that's another question mark that I have with Pedro as well. All of Pedro's fights have ended in the first round, and he's finished all his opponents that way, even before the UFC. So Latifi's not going to quite be that easy, I don't think, at least. I mean, if Pedro goes out there and does what he does again and defeats Latifi in the first round, I'll be really impressed. But Latifi's a pretty tough guy to stop. He has been knocked out a few times though, but again, that's not really the strength of Pedro. He does have enough power on the feet that he could do that, maybe land a big kick, even a body kick possibly. You never know. But I think more so than anything, it's going to be having to be Pedro getting Latifi on the ground and on the ground trying to utilize that ground and pound, utilize that size advantage that he has with the skill and the technique to stop Latifi, but it's going to not be easy. So for me, I guess what I'm trying to spit out here is I trust Latifi just a little bit more. If you look at the resume that he's faced, I mean, even his losses aren't bad really losses. I mean, he lost to Bader. That loss to Blachowicz right now doesn't sit that well for me, especially the way he went about it when he got, that liver shot or whatever, the body kick that kind of folded him over there. But outside of that, he rebounded pretty nicely. Even his win over Vellante. Now, a lot of people are going to knock Vellante. I understand that. I mean, the guy is kind of a mess in his own way, because you would think he has so much talent, so much potential. He should be better than what he is. But in that fight, Latifi did just make, I think, Vellante look pretty bad throughout that whole 3-round fight. So, in my opinion, if you look at the size of Vellante and the size of Pedro, it's comparable a little bit. And Vellante probably has a little bit more skill on the feet, even though his IQ is not the greatest at times. I mean, so this is a comparable type of matchup. Pedro's obviously a little bit stronger on the ground, but can he get Latifi down and control him? I'm not so sure. So with all that being said, again, it just points to me, look, Latifi's the more proven veteran here. I understand this matchup, probably the matchmaking's almost favoring Pedro here, because they want to see him pick off of a really talented, highly rated fighter so he can move up that ladder, but I'm not so sure he's going to get it done. So for now, at least, my pick's going to be Latifi to defeat Pedro, and probably inside the distance, because again, I don't think Pedro is going to go 3 rounds strong, especially with Latifi here. If Latifi gets out of the first round and starts putting that pressure on, I think eventually he's going to finish Pedro. So my pick is Latifi, and probably inside the distance.
Yeah, the big thing here are the question marks with Tyson Pedro. Pedro has not been out of the first round, really. He's not much of a striker. He doesn't have a great chin. What he does have is strong wrestling and really good ground and pound and decent submissions. So is he going to be able to get Latifi down? That's what this fight boils down to, because if he doesn't, he's in trouble. On the feet, Latifi isn't exactly a world beater, but he has a ton of power. He's explosive. He's a great athlete, and he's clearly significantly better on the feet than Pedro. And on the ground, Latifi's not bad on the ground. He has a decent grappling background. He has extremely good takedown defense. So Pedro is going to have his work cut out for him. Latifi's one of the strongest fighters in the entire Ultimate Fighting Championship. So if Pedro wants to get him down, he's not going to be able to overpower him. It's going to have to be all technique. And so far, no one's been able to take Latifi down. He has a 100% success rate against takedowns for defending him. So I think this is going to be a very, very difficult fight for Tyson Pedro, because if he can't get Latifi down, he's in huge trouble. I mean, you look at his fight against Khalil Roundtree, and Pedro did not immediately go for the takedown, and he got blasted on the feet by Roundtree. Now, I'm not saying Latifi has Roundtree striking credentials, but I mean, he's definitely much better striker than Pedro. And Latifi, while he's been knocked out a couple times, I'm not really worried about that unless he gets put on his back, because Pedro could knock him out for sure with ground and pound. But on the feet, Pedro just isn't a threat there. He's not the most fluid or dynamic striker. He just doesn't have that ability. I mean, it's pretty much entirely reliant on dragging Latifi to the ground and getting a stoppage. So I just like Latifi here. I mean, I think he's quicker. I think he's significantly better on the feet. He's more well-rounded. And then most importantly is he has been tested going the distance. Pedro has had a lot of quick stoppages. So if that doesn't happen, how does Pedro respond? Latifi's gone 5 rounds against Gegard Mousasi before. So I'm not worried about Latifi's conditioning one bit. And basically, as long as Latifi avoids being put on his back in the first round, he's in really good shape. So my pick has to be Ilir Latifi here. Now, moving down to the welterweight division, we have Neil Magny, who is 19-6, taking on Rafael dos Anjos, who is 26-9. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Dos Anjos, minus 150 to come back on Magny, plus 110. This line has been bet up a little bit. Right now it's minus 190. Dos Anjos to come back on Magny is at plus 165. So more actually coming in Dos Anjos' way. I think this was as high recently as in minus 230 or so, 240 or so. So it was almost 2.5 to 1 for Dos Anjos. That's how much early action came in his way. Now we're starting to see more action come in Magny's way as we get a little bit closer to fight time. To me, it's pretty clear who's the better fighter, who has the most skill here in this matchup. It's obviously Dos Anjos across the board. I mean, don't get me wrong. Magny is a very talented fighter in his own right, and he's done some really good things in the welterweight division. I mean, he's impressed me. I think he's overachieved, to be honest with you, across the board. But that being said, as far as skill set goes, if you look at the striking ability, Dos Anjos is the better boxer. If you look at the wrestling ability, Dos Anjos is the better wrestler. If you look at the jiu-jitsu ability, Dos Anjos is the better jiu-jitsu practitioner as well. So across the board in those aspects, Dos Anjos has him edged out. Size comes into play a little bit here, though. Magny's going to be much longer. Magny mentally at times, I mean, he's pretty good as far as fight IQ goes. Like I said, he overachieves a little bit because he knows what to utilize. He utilizes that reach fairly well. So on the feet, he's no slouch, even though I give the boxing edge to Dos Anjos with that reach, with that length that he has, and he can use that jab a little bit and get behind it. I mean, I don't think he's going to be the easiest fighter to deal with for Dos Anjos. But that being said, I expect Dos Anjos to have the edge there. Now, and as far as wrestling goes, I mean, we've seen Magny have success. He even took a guy like Gaslam down in their fight. I mean, that's where his wrestling can be sneaky good at times as well. So Gaslam, I mean, managed to come back towards the end, but Magny won that fight. So Magny has some impressive wins on his resume. I mean, beating some really good opponents. Look what he did to Hector Lombard. I mean, so you can never count this guy out. Magny's definitely that type of fighter that can make life miserable for you if you don't get him out of there. But in this matchup, again, 3 rounds, it's going to be tough for Magny, I think, to beat Dos Anjos. So I'm going to have to side with Dos Anjos, but I think that Magny's going to have his moments throughout the fight. The longer this fight plays out, it definitely gets interesting. And a lot of it is because of the size for me. I think Dos Anjos, I'm used to seeing him obviously in the lightweight division. I know he had some success and he looked okay against Safadine in his welterweight debut, but to me, I'm still sold on him being a lightweight. So we'll see how the size does impact him here. And if it doesn't do well, obviously he could drop back down to lightweight and get kind of back at his resume his career at lightweight. But this is going to be a big telling fight here for him, how he can adapt to the much longer, taller, bigger fighter in Magny. So we'll see how it works out. But skill for skill, there's no question Dos Anjos is the better fighter. So I got to lean his way. So my pick is Dos Anjos to win.
What Dos Anjos does as good as anybody is just put pressure on his opponents. Yeah, Dos Anjos probably has better boxing than Magny. Yeah, Dos Anjos has better ground game than Magny, but what he really likes to do is just push forward, force his opponents to engage with them, and force them to fight off their back foot. And if Neil Magny's fighting off his back foot, he's losing. Magny's a guy with a ridiculous reach. He has at least a 10-inch reach advantage in this fight. That is insane. And he's learning how to use it. I mean, if you go back and listen to the first time we were breaking down Neil Magny fights, I was like, this guy, he has such a great reach, but he doesn't know how to use it. And then maybe about 5 fights later, I'm like, you know what, Neil Magny, he's finally starting to figure out his reach. And then now I'm like, yeah, Neil Magny, his reach is excellent and he knows what he's doing with it. So he's clearly put the time in, and he has a good jab. If Magny can keep Dos Anjos at distance, he could frustrate him. I mean, Dos Anjos did have a lot of trouble with Tony Ferguson, and that's a fighter with a similar build to Neil Magny, and that was at lightweight. So Magny's a bigger fighter with a longer reach. So if he can utilize that jab, he could frustrate Dos Anjos as well. That being said, what Ferguson relied on a lot too is having a granite chin, and Magny does not have that. That is his biggest weakness right now, is he gets hurt in almost all of his fights, and he can get finished if Dos Anjos gets inside and starts cracking him with that, big left hand that he has. then I don't think Neil Magny can withstand that. And the other problem is, Magny, as well-rounded as he is, he's still not amazing at anything really other than conditioning. And training out of Colorado, nobody's going to out-condition Neil Magny, but I think Dos Anjos could potentially submit him as well. I mean, Damian Maia tore through his guard like butter and then was able to pretty quickly submit him in the second round of their fight. So Dos Anjos, he doesn't have Damian Maia level ground game, but he does have a very good ground game, and he could potentially pull that off. I just like Dos Anjos here because of the pressure he puts on his opponents, the pace he pushes, and with it being a 3-round fight, you don't really have to worry about Dos Anjos slowing down. Because, even if Magny wins the third round, I don't think Magny's going to win the first 2, and I don't see Magny getting a stoppage late either, even though he has had third-round stoppages in the past. Dos Anjos isn't exactly the type of guy that really gives up when he starts losing. He's more, he can hang on. So, in this fight, I see Dos Anjos forcing Magny to fight on his back foot. I think Dos Anjos gets inside, lands some good shots. I can see him hurting Magny and finishing him that way, or I could just see him outworking Magny early and getting inside that jab and at least winning the first 2 rounds, if not all 3. So my pick is going to be Dos Anjos. I don't think Neil Magny's size is going to be enough of an advantage for him. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have the women's bantamweight title on the line between champion Amanda Nunes, who is 14-4, and challenger Valentina Shevchenko, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Shevchenko minus 130, the comeback on Nunes at even money. Right now looking over 5 times. Shevchenko is minus 130, the comeback on Nunes plus 110. Line margins have tightened up. There's been a lot of two-way action coming out of this fight. And this is another one that we'll see flip between slight favorite Shevchenko to pick'em fight to slight favorite Nunes to pick'em fight to slight favorite Shevchenko. I think we'll see it back and forth throughout this whole week and until fight time. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where this fight closes. I think it might close exactly to pick'em. I know that the majority of the opinion out there favors Shevchenko. I mean, as really logically speaking, most of us should, right? If you look at what this fight breaks down to, and all of us are pretty much thinking the same way, those people that have been following the sport for a long time, those people that have been betting the sport for a long time as well. I mean, we all pretty much think that Shevchenko is going to weather that early storm against Nunes and get it to round 3, round 4, round 5. And on the scorecard, she's going to win those last 3 rounds, maybe even the second, depending on early Nunes gasses. But round 3, 4, or 5 is in the bank for Shevchenko, if not a finish along those rounds as well. Because Nunes, regardless of how hard she works, her conditioning is always her kryptonite. I mean, it's a shame, but that is exactly the case for Nunes. She's even admitted so in her, previous interviews in the past. She said that she's not sure what the deal was or whatever, but she works really hard. And I believe that. It's just some fighters, they're going to have that kind of issue no matter how hard they work. So I understand it, but that's definitely her kryptonite. Outside of that, though, Nunes is a force. I mean, she is one of the most devastating strikers ever in the history of the UFC women's division, regardless of the weight class. I mean, the girl has power behind her punches. Obviously, look at the opponents that she's defeated recently. I mean, it's been all respectable, to say the least, opponents. I mean, she's the one that dethroned. Again, I shouldn't say dethroned because Holly Holm was the one to dethrone her, but really retired Ronda Rousey. It looks like Ronda Rousey's not going to probably come back to MMA. If that's the case, I mean, Nunes is the one that retired her. That was brutal. Miesha Tate, that win that she had over Tate was phenomenal as well. And then before that, she fought Shevchenko, and you know what? In that first round, had Shevchenko in all sorts of trouble. The first couple rounds, really, she was dominant. I mean, she rocked Shevchenko, had her in trouble, had her close to being choked out. I mean, I thought that choke was going to be set in there. So Nunes was very, very close to getting the finish. So Shevchenko had to weather that storm, but then we all saw the writing on the wall once she got out of trouble, and once the third round hit, here came Nunes' cardio showing, and Shevchenko was able to win the third round. And if that fight would have been a 5-round fight, she would have won that fight. There's no question in my mind. And again, that's why we're all thinking the same way here. But I don't like it. I do not like it. I know Nunes, she's going to have to finish this fight. I think she believes that as well. I mean, I think, in my opinion, part of her UFC 213 exit, obviously, was the nerves. This is a high pressure fight for Nunes. She knows that if Shevchenko weathers the storm, she probably will lose her belt. So I think there's all sorts of mental battles being played here back and forth. And a lot of the demons in Nunes' head is probably caused by her own cardio. So who knows where she's at mentally here. I mean, like I said, she pulled out of that fight. She had some health concerns, even though they supposedly the hospital okayed her to compete. I understand. You got to respect the fighter's decision there. So no knocking her for stepping out when she thought she wasn't ready to fight. But mentally, it leaves me a little bit of concern with Nunes. But with all that being said, is Shevchenko going to weather that early storm again? We've seen her get rocked in the past. That's what bothers me. She's tough as nails. She could weather that storm. She's hard to finish, and she has, in my opinion, and I've said this before as well, Shevchenko is the best fighter in the bantamweight division. She has a total package. I mean, she can outstrike you. She's proven that time and time again. You put her in with elite strikers, she can outstrike them. Look at Holly Holm, what she did there. She can out-wrestle you. You put her in, she's smaller. She doesn't even have the size against most of these bantamweights out there, and she still out-wrestles them, out-muscles them at times as well, out-techniques them. So Shevchenko across the board for me, she showed submissions as well. She is the most complete fighter we've seen in the bantamweight division in a long, long time. But to me, there is a question with her size. Again, she's a little bit small, I think, for the weight class, but she makes up for all of that with her skill. Now, that being said, Nunes is a very skilled fighter as well, but she has that size, she has that power, and she's obviously a difficult out in the first couple rounds. So to me, I guess I'm going to go against the grain right now, and I'm going to pick Nunes to pull off what is a very slight upset. And I'm going against the public grain as well, because I know most of you guys out there probably listening are picking Shevchenko to win. And I respect that. I understand it. Again, I can break down that fight just as you guys do. And I think that it will happen. If this goes into deep waters, Nunes is in trouble. But I'm going to start thinking and bank on the fact that Nunes, I mean, early on, not many people can weather that storm. And if Shevchenko going to be able to weather that storm twice, I'm not so sure. So there's my confidence level with this play or this matchup overall. I mean, the pick, it's tough to pick, but putting your money and laying the chalk right now against a fighter like Nunes with her momentum overall and how dangerous she can be early on, I don't know if that's the smartest thing either. So I'm going to pick Nunes, go against the grain, pick her to win. And there probably could be some value on the Nunes early stoppage prop, like KO or something to be said about that as well. So, I mean, if you guys are going to bet Nunes, that's the way you probably bet her, because I don't think she wins on the scorecards here. So that being said, Nunes is my pick. And we'll see how this fight plays out. Very excited to see this fight finally take place. So, and I should say this as well. Based on the weigh-ins, we're going to have to see these ladies hit the scale. I might flip back to Shevchenko. I mean, if Nunes, if I'm uncomfortable with anything at the weigh-ins, I could, that's how much on the fence I am about this fight. So back and forth I go, but right now I'm going to stick to Nunes. Make sure you guys check out MMAOddsBreaker.com, our staff picks. That will have my final play, Brian's final play, everybody's final picks and predictions on that. So check out MMAOddsBreaker.com as we get closer to fight day.
As Nick mentioned, this fight boils down to whether or not Amanda Nunes can get the finish in the first 2 rounds. Because if you go back to every fight she's ever had in her entire career, she has never won a 3rd round. She's barely won a 2nd round in her fights, in her fight history. But if you look at the times that Amanda Nunes has gone to a 3rd round, against Shevchenko, she got dominated in that 3rd round. Against Kat Zingano, she got finished in that 3rd round. And then even in some 2nd round fights, Alexis Davis, was able to finish her with seconds remaining in the 2nd round. Sarah D'Alelio was able to easily, get a decision against her by winning the 3rd round. That was more before Nunes really became a force, but just the fact that she has never won a 3rd round is quite telling to me. So, this time around, I mean, she needs to really put the pedal to the metal early and try to take Shevchenko out, because if you go back and watch that fight, she was dominating Shevchenko. I mean, she was beating her on the feet, even though Shevchenko is an extremely talented striker. Nunes was just packing more heat on her punches. She was quick. She was explosive. And then she took it to the ground and was the bigger, stronger fighter on the ground as well. She's a bigger fighter than Shevchenko. So she used that size and strength to her advantage on top of the punching power. But again, that goes all out the window the second she starts to get tired. She gets more hittable. She definitely becomes exposed on the ground. Even though she has a pretty good ground game and pretty good wrestling, when she gets tired, she just becomes a punching bag on the ground. So if Nunes does not put Shevchenko away, then I just don't see how it's possible she could win. It literally, unless she's done something miraculous in the training camp leading up to that, the last fight at 213, and then in between heading up to this one, unless she's just been doing nothing but running marathons, then there's just no way she could win a decision. So I like Shevchenko. I mean, she's never been finished unless it was a cut early in her career against Liz Carmouche, and that was 7 years ago, I think. So Shevchenko is just an experienced, savvy striker that should be able to survive early against Nunes, and then she should be able to take over as Nunes starts to fade. So it just all relies on whether or not Nunes can make something happen early in this fight in the first 2 rounds, because I just don't think it happens unless, something freaky happens, or maybe she plans just a huge shot, but Shevchenko should have the defense and overall striking ability to avoid that huge shot. So I like Shevchenko. I think that she weathers the storm and gets the finish, or at least wins a decision. But with the way Nunes gasses, I think her in a 4th round would just be embarrassing. So we'll see what happens, but I like Valentina Shevchenko to become the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening, we have Demetrius Johnson in a UFC flyweight title fight defending his championship. Demetrius Johnson is 26-2-1, and he's taking on Ray Borg, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Demetrius Johnson, minus 600. The comeback on Ray Borg at plus 400. The line has skyrocketed up, minus 1250 right now for Johnson, and Borg coming back around plus 800. So typical, recent type of Demetrius Johnson line. I mean, there's a lot of respect for Johnson. I understand that this is the fight that's going to, break Anderson Silva's record as well for all-time wins, what I believe is 12 or 13 in that regard, if I'm not mistaken. So that is very important. And I mean, I know that that's a notch on Johnson's resume that you could feel proud of. I mean, the most title defenses of all time. I mean, that's how dominant this guy is. And in my opinion, he is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Now, again, I can argue that John Jones's resume is more impressive, but as far as skill set goes, in my opinion, Johnson's the most complete fighter on the UFC roster when it comes to wrestling, when it comes to striking, when it comes to jiu-jitsu. I mean, he's beating guys on the ground that are jiu-jitsu world champions. I mean, it's incredible what this guy has been able to do, Demetrius Johnson, and who he's faced. So, I mean, even though John Jones, again, his resume overall might be impressive, I mean, Johnson's resume hasn't been against a bunch of slouches either. He's faced a lot of decent competition in the 125-pound division. So, Johnson, in my opinion, the best fighter in MMA right now overall. He is that good. But here, I opened it a little bit tighter because this is another spot where it can be a little bit intriguing, especially on the ground. I mean, this is definitely one of the better ground fighters that Johnson has faced, and he's faced a lot of good ones. And look, we've seen even against Hayes, he was able to submit Hayes. I mean, that's crazy. So what makes you say he won't submit Borg? I mean, again, different styles of fighters. Borg is a little bit of a different animal than a guy like Hayes. So I respect both of their ground games, but I think Borg just brings a different aspect to the table a little bit. I mean, on the ground right now, he hasn't really, in the UFC so far, he hasn't really lost to anyone outside of Scoggins. And that's saying a lot. I mean, Scoggins was a big flyweight. He was able to control him. He was able to wrestle him, just kind of pin him, hold him there a little bit. More times than not, Borg is able to scramble out of those positions, no matter who he's in there with, and not get pinned down and then maintain or hop on your back or get himself in a superior position. I mean, so if Johnson can maintain and control Borg on the ground like Scoggins did, then obviously he's going to have a big advantage here in this fight. But I'm not so sure he can actually hold him down that much. But again, Johnson's a special fighter, so I'm never going to count anything out against him. Now, that being said, on the feet, it's going to be interesting, but Johnson obviously has an edge on the feet. He has a more diverse striking skill set overall. I think Borg isn't bad. He's still developing that striking ability. It's getting better fight by fight. It's not bad. Again, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he has his moments on the feet, but I think overall Johnson will be picking Borg apart on the feet. I think Johnson will be pushing the higher pace. So Borg's only shot in this fight is the ground, is to utilize his biggest strength. And I don't know if that's good enough here against a guy like Johnson. So I understand, the action coming in Johnson's way, but to me, this is probably stylistically one of the tougher ground matchups and ground battles he's going to have. And if Borg's able to get it to the ground and utilize some of his scrambling ability and do what he does best, as I just mentioned, I think he might have a little bit more success than we all think. But I'm not going to pick against the man, Demetrius Johnson. As I said, to me, he's the best fighter in the world in MMA right now, regardless of UFC or whatever, anywhere in the planet, really, when it comes to that mixed martial arts. Johnson's the man, in my opinion. And I'm not going to pick against that guy until we see a huge sign of decline or something crazy happens or whatnot along the way in his career. But I think he's going to go ahead and break that title record here, and he's going to be probably the most dominant champion of all time in the UFC. So The pick is Demetrius Johnson. He probably has another impressive type of fight, whether it hits the scorecards or he gets a late stoppage or whatnot along the way. He's probably going to look good doing so. So hard to pick against the man. My pick is DJ.
Ray Borg is definitely a threat in the flyweight division, and he has really taken his game to a new level since teaming up with Greg Jackson. Like earlier in his UFC career, he was more just exclusively ground focused, wanted to just get to the floor no matter what the cost, try to get her back and utilize sweeps and transitions on the canvas. And now he's able to mix things up a little bit better. His striking is improving. His wrestling is improving. He's more able to get top position and dominant positions against his opponents. He can really beat them up with ground and pound better. Like everything about him is just getting a little bit more well-rounded. But that being said, Demetrius Johnson is the most well-rounded fighter possibly in UFC history. I mean, on the feet, this guy is explosive, quick, has the ability to have heavy hands when he wants to if he sits down on his strikes, like you saw with the brutal knockout of Joseph Benavidez. He, in my opinion, has the best dirty boxing and clinch game in all of MMA. This guy just tears people up in the clinch with knees, with elbows, with dirty boxing. Just you saw with Henry Cejudo, you saw it against John Dodson. He is just so ferocious on the inside, and it can be devastating and fight ending. And then he wears people down with a relentless pace because nobody can really keep up with him for 5 straight rounds because he is so well conditioned and such a tremendous athlete. And then even though he's had some issues on the ground, he still just crushes people on the ground as well with top position, with perfectly timed takedowns, with excellent submission ability where he can just, even like a guy like Wilson Hayes that Nick brought up, an elite grappler, and Demetrius Johnson just got top position against him, beat the crap out of him, and then tapped him out. And he's done that against a lot of great fighters. So people need to quit underestimating Demetrius Johnson or saying that he doesn't deserve to be the top pound for pound guy because John Jones has been suspended and out. But you know what? Demetrius Johnson has been here. He's been defending his title over and over and over again. He's been finishing his title challengers. He has literally cleaned out the division, and Ray Borg has risen up to the occasion. But again, he's just not on Demetrius Johnson's level. That being said, there is a path to victory for Ray Borg. Johnson has had some issues on the ground. You look at the Tim Elliott fight. Johnson had, he was in a little bit of trouble in that first round against Tim Elliott, and it was pretty much all because of what happened on the ground. So if Ray Borg can kind of get this fight to the floor, maybe get Johnson on his back, he could make something happen. Back in the day, before Johnson was even champ, Ian McCall had some success against Johnson on the ground. Dominic Cruz, when Johnson fought for the bantamweight title back in the day, before the flyweight division even existed, Cruz didn't even want to strike with Johnson. He actually just took Johnson down the whole fight, and Johnson was trying to knock his head off on feet. So the path to victory is there for Borg, and it comes through the ground, but can he keep it up? Can he sustain it? I mean, Borg cuts a lot of weight. He's had a lot of issues making the flyweight division in the past. So it's not going to be an easy weight cut for him. Will he be able to fight for 5 rounds? We've never seen that. There's a lot of question marks with Borg, and especially if he doesn't get to the floor. I mean, you saw Justin Scoggins was lighting him up when Borg was having issues getting things going with the way that he fights. So when Borg is out of his element, he struggles. And I think Demetrius Johnson, being so incredibly well-rounded, is going to force Ray Borg to be out of his element for extended periods of time. I can't promise that Johnson's going to get a finish because Borg is really tough and he's young and scrappy and very capable. But I do think that Demetrius Johnson avoids being put on his back and avoids being put in dominant positions. And Johnson should win this fight relatively handily to set the record for title defenses. So my pick is going to be Demetrius Johnson. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 215. Now, our premium bets for the event will be released this Friday following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to the free bet mailing list. Special thanks to the sponsor, 5 Dime Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.